Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Legal Aid Queensland's webinar for May, which is engaging with young people, changing attitudes and behaviours towards violence against women. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands on which we're all meeting from today. In Brisbane, it's the Yagara and Turrbal people. We pay respects to their elders, law, customs and creation spirits. We recognise that these lands have always been places of ceremony, teaching, research and learning, and we acknowledge the important role that First Nations people play in our community and improving our legal system. I just wanted to mention that today's content may be difficult, it may be challenging for some people. We ask you to take care of yourselves and your safety, and by all means log off for a bit if you need to, or access any support services that you need to. So just a bit of housekeeping. Firstly, I'll introduce myself. Apologies that I'm not on screen. I'm Catherine Gorder. I'm the facilitator of today's webinar. I'm joining you from the Community Legal Education team here at Legal Aid. We run these webinars each month. So just a bit of housekeeping to run through firstly. The webinar is being recorded. After the webinar has concluded, we will add the captions and add it to our YouTube channel, and we'll share it with everybody who's registered for today's webinar. So today's session is a 1-hour webinar. Our presenters will be speaking for about 40 to 50 minutes. If you have any questions for the presenters during the webinar, please pop them in the question box on your screen, and we'll take a look at those at the end in the Q&A section. I have added a copy of today's PowerPoint slides to the handout section. So if you just go to the handout section in the pop-up screen on your computer, you can download a copy of those as well. So today we have a panel of speakers joining us. We have on the far left Fiona Fairbrother, who is a principal lawyer in Legal Aid's Violence Prevention and Women's Advocacy team. We have Vi Leversater from Youth Advocacy Centre. Vi is a solicitor in the Domestic and Family Violence Legal Service there. And we have Alex, who's a group facilitator from the Living Without Violence program at Anglicare. So in today's session, we're going to be looking at the National Community Attitudes Towards Violence Against Women survey. We'll be exploring youth advocacy and a case study. We'll then also look at the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force Hear Her Voice Report 1. We'll be exploring what respectful relationships look like and primary prevention of violence against women. We'll look at another case study, and then we'll look to answer any questions you submit. So we like to run a few polls in our webinars to get a sense of who's joining us today. So our first poll is asking, what region are you joining us from today? So I'll just pop that up so you can answer. So the options are South East Queensland, Far North Queensland, Regional Queensland, or outside of Queensland. So I'll just give you 20 seconds to pop your answers in. Just a couple more seconds. Great, I'll share those results with you. So most people are joining us from South East Queensland today, 75% of you. We've got a few from Far North and a couple from regional and some from outside Queensland, so that's great. The next poll is, what is your role? So I'll just launch that one. So the options are you're a support or community worker, a financial counsellor, health or education worker, social worker, lawyer or other. So I'll give you about 15 to 20 seconds for that one as well. Couple more seconds. Great, I'll share those results now as well. So most people here are lawyers, that's great. Thank you for joining us. We've also got some support workers, financial counsellors and a lot of social workers too, so that's great. Another poll, do you work with young people or carers of young people? I'll just bring that one up for you. So if you could vote on that one as well. Couple more seconds. Okay, share those results. Yes, 90% of you work with young people or carers of young people. That's great. Now, at this point, I'm going to hand over to Fiona, who's going to talk a little bit why we're going to be talking about the National Community Attitudes Towards Violence Against Women survey. Fiona?
Thank you, Catherine. So the purpose that we have today is this presentation. We're focusing on young people as a distinct group, and that came from the National Community Attitudes Towards Violence Against Women survey, where they studied the understanding and attitudes held by young people as a distinct group. Now that survey it's a large scale survey, it's long and it's a long running survey, and it measures Australians' understanding and attitudes regarding the complex issues of violence against women. It is important that each wave of the NCAS, which is the survey, makes small changes to ensure that it continues to respond to emerging evidence and evolving social norms. So individual attitudes are beliefs and feelings towards something, and they're shaped by our families, friends, and the communities, and by our institutions. So that's why we're focusing it for lawyers, but also for you as an individual. So it's not only you in your role as a professional, but somebody in the community. They reflect the norms that exist in schools, in the media, and in our policies and laws. So it's not only the laws itself that we implement, but the policies that we can put forward and change. Some of the reasons to focus on young people is firstly, young people themselves experience violence and specific impact of violence. Young women in particular are a high risk of some forms of violence victimisation. Exposure to domestic and family violence is also increasingly recognised as a form of child abuse. Early exposure to violence has long-term negative impacts on physical and mental health. So if we can make these changes earlier, it has a greater impact. Secondly, young people are at a stage where they are developing their values, attitudes and understanding. They can be catalysts of social change. Researching the attitudes and understandings of young people is the first step to supporting social change to shape a culture that rejects violence against women and fosters gender equality. So in this Young Australians report, they're looking for young people, they saw them the age 16 to 24 and compare them to an older group, which is 25 and above. And they also looked at different cohorts within 16 to 24. So these were 16 and 17-year-olds, and then that was compared to 18 and 24-year-olds. So now we'll look at that's just a bit of a summary of why we're here, why we're doing this. So if we could have a look at the poll and see what other people, I'm sure many of them have read the survey.
Yeah, so I'll launch the poll now. So the question is, young people's understanding of and attitudes towards violence against women and gender inequality are slowly improving over time. True or false? So if you can just answer that one. I'll give you 10 more seconds. A couple more seconds. Okay, I'll close that off and share the results. So Fiona, our audience thinks, 77% of our audience thinks that answer is true.
Very. So we'll look at some of, these are the results of this study. So as you can see, it's a long-standing study. So every 4 years, they complete the survey. And it shows here that there is a slow increase. And you can see from 2013 up to 2021, there has been that marked increase. This is, as I said, it's a large sector of the community that are surveyed. So that's positive. You didn't see much change between 2009 to 2013, but then you've seen that, so that between 2017 and 21 has been a really good increase in understanding. The next one shows, So this is the next part of it all that show that young Australians' attitudes are improving. So previously that was around the whole cohort. This is in actually just the young persons. So that's showing there was absolutely no change, 2009 to 2013. And then again, this is the cohort that's increasing. And this is where we can have, you know, social reform. So it's really positive. So there are a minority of young people that also have an advanced understanding of violence against women. So it's not only the majority of young people, but then this is just an understanding, but then there's a smaller group that have an advanced understanding, which is really positive. That's really, so this is just setting the scene for everybody. So this is now the question 2.
Okay, I'll run this poll now. Another question for the audience. Young women, I'll just launch that for you. Young women are more likely to demonstrate advanced understanding of violence against women and attitudes towards this violence and gender inequality compared to men. True or false? So if you could just answer that one as well, please. I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, I'll close that one now and share the results. So the majority of our audience, 87%, think that is true.
Fabulous. So yes, it is true. But it means that, you know, there are more young women that have that advanced understanding. So it is, we can work with the young men to similarly mature and have that better understanding. So that's useful to look at that, and that's why we're looking at that topic today.
Okay, so we have another poll. I'll run that one for you now. And this is asking, do young Australians want to look out for each other? Yes or no? So if you could answer that one again. Thank you. I'll give you 5 more seconds. Great, I'll close that and share the results. And yes, 86% of you think that young Australians want to look out for each other. Yes.
And yes, so if we could look at the actual results from the survey, I was quite impressed with this because, you know, it is something that you can see that they would go and they would say this is not appropriate. So I was quite pleased that the young people would be doing this. And then we go on to the next part where it shows that 91% of younger respondents agreed that violence against women is a problem in Australia. So there's that knowledge out there. There is that understanding that they would step in. So what is really important is, you know, how do they do it in a safe and comfortable way? How do they have these conversations? How do we help them to reflect? And that's what we're really looking at today.
Thanks, Fiona. So the next section of our presentation, I'll invite Vi to share her section about her work at the Youth Advocacy Centre. Thank you, Vi.
Thank you. If I go over time, just chat me. Hi everyone. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. We honour their deep connection to their ancestral lands. We pay our respects to the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, the traditional custodians of the land in and around Brisbane. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and I would like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are present during this presentation. So a little bit about Youth Advocacy Centre. We're based in South Brisbane. We're a not-for-profit organisation that has a mission to increase young people's access to justice, both legal and social. And some of the services that we do provide is legal and court support, bail support, family support, also youth and accommodation support, and also we do and conduct community legal education. So we're a multidisciplinary organisation. Our domestic and family violence legal services. So I am the domestic and family violence lawyer at YAC, and we represent young people under 18 who are residing in the South Queensland region and across the 3 detention centres in Queensland. And these services that we provide are legal representation for young people in courts from Caboolture to Southport, legal advice, and also legal education, primarily in the youth detention. We also provide information and resources that are at the youth detention in regards to domestic and family violence. Although I have represented a young person out in Dalby. That's usually if there's a need for us to go we're for a young person. So needs basis, case by case. Yeah. I'm a bit nervous. So, yeah. So how did the Domestic and Family Violence Service come about? So the DFV position at YAC came about after YAC conducted a project, which is the pilot project. And this was funded by the Commonwealth Government in February 2020 to October of 2021, and which identified that 63% of young people involved in the Queensland youth justice system had experienced or been impacted by domestic family violence. 1 in 10 information from youth justice indicated approximately 1 in 10 young people in the Queensland detention system are subject to domestic and family violence orders. In 2021, police reported that there were 385 young people under 18 years with an active domestic violence order in Queensland, and 165 young people under the age of 18 had been dealt with for breach of domestic violence in 2020. So in this context, in the DFV space, it is important to note that individuals under the age of 18 can only be named an aggrieved or victim or respondent in a DFO if they were involved in an intimate and personal relationship. So what the pilot identified is that domestic and family violence is typically discussed with a focus on adult victims and perpetrators. This often leads to the vulnerabilities of young people being overlooked in discussions about process, reforms and other changes within the DFV system. The Queensland Government's Youth Justice Strategy in 2019 to 2023 highlights the necessity of preventing and responding to domestic, family and sexual violence and its impacts on children and young people. However, the Youth Justice Strategy acknowledges that DFV is a significant risk factor for repeated offending among young people. The strategy primarily focuses on domestic family violence experience by young people within their family homes, emphasising exposure to and prevention of this type of violence. However, it does not adequately address young people's experiencing domestic and family violence in intimate personal relationship, nor does it consider the implications of domestic violence orders being breached. Therefore, addressing this gap, we thought that we needed to address this gap to ensure that young people who are victims of domestic violence, whether in a family, home or intimate relationship, receives appropriate legal protection and support. By addressing the underlying issues related to domestic violence, we can help reduce the risk of repeated offending among young people. And with YAC, providing dedicated domestic violence lawyer, ensures that young people have access to legal advice, representation and education about their rights and the legal process involved to make referrals to also intervention programs. We've also secured funding till June of 2025. We aim to provide the essential support needed to address these critical issues and ensure the safety and well-being of young people in our community. Okay, so I guess we're bringing it all in together. Based on my practical experience, many young people understand that violence is wrong. Some still perceive certain abuse behaviour as normal in relationships.
Did we want to go back to talk about that case study?
I think we might have fit.
Yeah, I think if we can go back one more.
One more?
That one, yeah. That's the one there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in regards to if I've gone back to here.
That's the previous one. So this now is this slide. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone.
That's okay. That's
That's
okay.
okay, that one? Is that the one?
Take two. The DFV Legal Services.
Yeah,
so
on the next one, I think. That one. Yeah.
Perfect.
So this is how you're addressing it.
Yes. So how we're addressing this is that we're providing services. For example, so if a young person is facing a domestic violence situation, they will receive legal representation in court, advice on their rights and options. And we also can make internal referrals within YAG for social support to the young person. And this includes assistance with housing, education, or training needs, income support, including help with Centrelink. So that's what we have in place to assist in trying to breach this gap. And also we are targeting the youth detention centre by providing legal education and resources in detention centres to hopefully try and prevent sort of future sort of involvement. And we provide legal education once a month, both in the Brisbane Youth Detention Centre and West Moreton as well, so we can try and catch the...
Do you go out as a group or is it one-on-one? Or?
We do have groups where we would provide the legal education in a group setting, but then if sometimes a young person might come and say, I've got this issue, and so we will do a one-on-one, or we'll make a professional appointment to go and see that individual young person. Yeah. And then they can call us. We can also put our phone number on their phone list.
Yeah.
So that way it's free for them to contact us and speak to us about any in private. But usually those in units is not that private.
No.
So yeah, that's what our main services. Okay, so our pilot project is consistent with the findings of the NCAS and highlights the critical need for educating young people about the full spectrum of abusive behaviours. Many young people do understand that violence is wrong, but some still perceive certain abusive behaviours as normal in relationship. Examples of misconceptions is jealousy and control. Controlling a partner's actions out of jealousy is sometimes seen by young people as a sign of love. rather than abuse or verbal abuse. Insults and yelling might be dismissed as normal arguments instead of recognised as harmful behaviour. So I do have the case study. And because I'm so creative, X and Y, there is a little bit more which I will sort of read out. X is a 15-year-old boy, was in an intimate relationship with his girlfriend Y for 8 months. During the relationship, Y sent X nude pictures of herself. After Y ended their relationship, 3 weeks later, X sent one of these pictures to Y's father with an alert message which says, "You need to teach her a lesson." A complaint was made to the police and a protection order was sought. Subsequently, a temporary protection order was made. So in this example, I guess going back to what young people sort of view as abusive behaviour, and what, when I first spoke with X, he generally believed that his actions were acceptable. He justified his behaviour by explaining that the same pictures were sent to other guys that he knew, and he wanted Y's father to understand that his daughter was doing and what she was doing, and to talk to her. X sincerely believed he had good intentions and was trying to protect Y. So the process that we normally go through in talking with this with a young person is that I normally would begin by explaining the harmful and abusive nature of his behaviour. I would inform him that, inform X that sending pictures to Y's father may be considered as an act of domestic violence. X was generally shocked by this information and repeatedly stated that he did not know his action could be interpreted this way. I further explained categories in the legislation of the law that could be considered abusive, which is emotional, psychological abuse, and that the act of sharing intimate images without consent causes psychological harm. Sexual abuse, distributing nude images without the person's consent can also be considered a form of sexual abuse. Cyberbullying and digital abuse. In the digital age that we are currently now, such actions are often recognised as cyberbullying or digital abuse. So in speaking with X in that way, it's getting X to tune his mind into thinking more about the implications of his actions and understanding how it could be, interpreted.
So when you have a conversation with X, how do you start that conversation really? That's, I suppose, for us as people who work mainly with adults, then, if you're working with the youth, you don't want them to close down and not listen to what you're saying. So what are some of the techniques that you do?
I find it like sort of approaching them like, "Hey mate."
Yeah.
And then I'll introduce myself and say who I am. And usually what I find is that, I let the young person know that anything they do tell me is confidential.
Yeah.
And that I have a duty to them to treat any information that they provide me with respect, and that I'm not going to go out and tell anyone about it. I also then sort of, with the new laws, do say, but if you do disclose any sexual offending by an adult to a child, then I'll say that's when I have to break my promise about.
Yeah.
So I kind of bring it to a point where they feel comfortable enough, but I also want them to feel like, and also, during duty law, you're just calling up people, Tom,
Yeah.
and they come in and they sit and you go through this process.
Yeah.
Whereas with young people, I find it that you've got to engage them in a way that they feel comfortable. And usually I find when a young person's comfortable with you, they're quite honest.
Yeah.
And they would say, yeah, I did that, or no, or they would tell you what they were thinking at the time.
Yeah.
So it gives you an insight of kind of, you know, or maybe this is a trauma-informed sort of reaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because they're not forthcoming in that sort of situation. So if you were to sit there and ask them and say, have you ever been exposed to domestic violence? The level of it, and as we sort of spoke, it's sometimes to the extreme, I guess, end of the spectrum where you might have an agreed, let's say, been in the bruises, where they can physically see it. Like in their mind, that's domestic violence.
Yeah.
Verbal abuse, to them, it's not. Or if there's no bruises, so if a push and they fall down, you know, it's like.
And this social media, that's like an enormous problem, isn't it?
Mm.
And really about trying to get them to reflect. But I think, you know, that's the part that I think as lawyers we're trying to also consider, how do we make them reflect and not be judgmental, but hopefully getting them to start to think from a different way. And so some curiosity, and that's, what do you do, Alex, with those?
Yeah, I guess before I open up too much, absolutely, and there's a lot that resonates with me with what Barnes is saying.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I mean, we can continue the discussion. I mean, I don't know how people are doing it. We don't have to necessarily stick to the PowerPoints. We can just sort of have a discussion in that sense, because just going by like how you deal with, you know, different individuals and young people. For example, from my experience, if a young person is protected, they're more likely to engage with the system. They're more likely. So when, like, I do have an example of one of where a supportive parent was there, and it was in relation to verbal abuse, where the young person was like, well, it's normal.
Yeah,
you know, it's normal. But then when his mum had posted the question to him, would you ever call your nan that?
Yeah.
And he was like, no.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's no way I would. And then she was like, would you call me that? And he's like, no. So having a supportive family, I find with the young ones that come through, are open to sort of rethinking in regards to their way of believing, versus ones that are unsupported, which they will, the way that you interact with them will make a difference on how they would sort of view and see the situation, and that's where a lot of programs do.
A question around what would you say if this was happening to your sister or your female cousin, and it personalises it and gets them outside of themselves in some respect and gets them to think differently.
Yeah. And so when they don't have a support network, which often they don't, is that when you refer them to your social workers in-house, or?
Yes, we do, or we would sort of put it to them if they're interested. So the ones that are in, let's say, on remand in custody, they would be interested in attending the sort of responsible men, I think, behaviour that's run by KIMS, I think, which is outsourced by Youth Justice, and they're willing to sort of attend. And then when they do come out, or that's when we sort of try and sort of link them up. And this is where our youth support groups at YAC, they do go in on a regular basis in the watch house, as well as the detention centres, just to, you know, make sure that the young people that are being seen, like welfare checks and that, and they usually sort of pick up. And sometimes we might make a referral that way to check up on the young person that's there, see how they're going, and and making those referrals. So
Interesting.
It's very interesting.
All right. I could get, yeah, what's my time?
We're okay.
You're doing well.
We're okay.
We're okay.
We're doing great. We'll make accommodations.
Catherine will tell us if we're behind.
I'll do it. Just, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So where am I in now?
So that you're challenging this about, so some groups might be difficult in that they don't have a lot of supports, or that they're far from their community. And so that's really where I think that would be a challenge as well. And how do you deal with that?
How do we deal with it? So usually, I guess from a practical standpoint, it's really trying to kind of, you ask questions in a way where they will talk to you. So it's not about, did you know that domestic violence is wrong, blah, blah, blah. So it's more about engaging them. Sometimes I found that sometimes the first visit or our first encounter, we haven't even spoken about the law.
Yeah.
Because they, you know, you can tell by their body language, they might just be like this. And then you might say, oh, how's it going? Good. and then you're like, oh, what are you doing today? So then you know you're not going to get anything from them. So you've got to just be aware and conscious of that, and just, and sometimes it might be just, you know, like, oh, hey, have you seen this program? What do you watch TikTok? And usually that's my
Hearing.
My at TikTok.
Yeah.
Is, yeah, hey, have you seen this, you know, like trend on TikTok? And usually they'll say yes. And then that's where it sparks up. So, and I know with lawyers, they are with time constraints as well. So it's a hard.
I think it's important to make that extra time to build that rapport, but also to sort of not see technology as always a negative, because there could be some things on with technology that are reflective and asking good questions. I think we've just got to know where they are. And really ask some of those questions if around bullying, you know, what were your thoughts when you did that? What were your thoughts as to why you were doing that? Like you said with your case study, you know, there was a genuine thought that he was doing the right thing without actually working out, well, how would this actually be received? Yeah.
And working with young people as well, we've always got to sort of understand that the maturity level is not fully developed. So you've got to make sort of, I guess, exceptions to that as well. So not to sort of think that you're going to explain something and they're going to get it straight away, or they're going to, you know, get it. So it's,
they'll take some time to think it through. And I think that's really good to understand that, you know, it is, their minds are maturing as well. You don't want to talk down to them. You want to talk to them, but also let them know when that behaviour is just not okay in society. And, you know, just because it's been okay text to a number of people doesn't make it okay. Yeah. So the challenges that you have for First Nations people?
So First Nations, I had this sort of protective cultural practices where in a lot of First Nations community, they do promote violence against women and children, versus this where on the other side where Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders are overrepresented, and the other side where they're with higher domestic violence rates. So, and that's, you know, usually due to, like, you know, poverty, unemployment and discrimination. So when I'm dealing with young people, I usually have that in the forefront of my mind, in the sense that there is, I mean, in general, young people don't want to engage with the court system. More so with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and usually that's because they've got a really huge sort of mistrust with legal systems, and that's due to, like, historical injustice and ongoing discriminations, which have led to deep-seated mistrust of the legal and judicial system, and also negative experience with the system. So I always approach that, you know, so my go-to first step is that that's their viewpoint. That's how they view me, that I'm part of the system.
Yeah.
But also I have to respect and understand their history,
Yeah.
and where they come from. So when I'm dealing with a young, I don't know if I'm making sense, but usually when I'm dealing with a young person, First Nations, like I always sort of try and engage them in a way where it doesn't feel like I'm talking to them or talking down to them.
Yeah.
But my approach, I also find that telling stories, like you're saying, where you're personalizing stuff, then I find it that they will engage with me a lot better. And sometimes I might share, like from my cultural background, you know, where sometimes I've used one example where had a First Nations, you know, who identifies as an Aboriginal, and we were talking about verbal abuse. And then I just sort of said to him whether he had heard of like the laughing Samoans, and he's like, no. So I was telling him it's Samoans who are comedians, and in the Samoan, like they believe that the culture where they would say, you know, Samoans don't give compliments, they give jokes, but jokes hurt. So it was kind of like and they sort of found that a bit funny. I mean, it was funny because I did the accent, but I'm not going to do that. But from there, it created sort of a conversation between, and then,
I think it is about opening a conversation to make them comfortable, but also we have to have at the back of our mind what are their experiences, and sometimes you need to ask them a little bit about what are your experiences, you know, because as you were saying, if there's so many other social needs that they have, you know, the law's the least of their problem, really. And it is, you want to come from a healing perspective as well. Okay. So did we talk about your case study there? Have we?
Oh, I sort of spoke about it briefly. And this case study was in regards to this young, who identified as Aboriginal. And this was the young person with the supportive mum, who had supported him through the court process. And she was the one that asked those questions. And to me, I thought that was important to highlight that protective cultural practices, because that's the other side where, you know, we don't really see a lot, or it doesn't get explored a lot. So I thought that was pretty important. I don't know if you, but
I do think, like if you have community in a home where they can have those conversations and really have that chat with a young person, I mean, it's the whole of community and everywhere. Like we've all got to own our own part in this as well, and be able to say when something's not acceptable, to say that's not okay. But maybe if a family member knows him well, understands what's important to him. So I
don't know if you guys read it, but I guess the other thing I wanted to sort of say about that is that anyone, I guess, online as well could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there is a culture appropriate sort of program run in regards to.
That is correct. I haven't seen one that that is appropriate, or there is a referral. I know they were trying to get some programs, and it is about understanding that for people from First Nations or particular groups, and we'll probably ask you, Alex, is how do you engage, and do they actually engage well in group settings that maybe, and how do you be culturally appropriate, or how do you get that in place? I mean, I think that is a gap. And we'll talk about that later, because it actually shows in some of the reports that it is a large gap, and that the government needs to be really focusing hard on that.
We have, I think it's 19.6% of our cohort is identifying Aboriginal and Torres Strait. So it's significant.
So our solution and sorry, so solutions and intervention. So what YAC has done to try and sort of improve and close this gap is our legal education, which is collaborating with the detention centres to allow us to sort of come in and provide this service, and for our pamphlets and fact sheets to be available at the detention centres for young people to sort of to read and know about our services. And today is our pilot youth service at the DFV court in Brisbane. So today was our first day, which we've been engaged with collaborative effort to offer a dedicated service for young people, individuals appearing at the DFV court, which we collaborated with legal aid, other community legal centres, as well as the magistrate court. So we'll watch this space.
Yeah.
See how we go.
I think it's really important, especially if it, can I just ask, in the youth detention centres, are there a lot of them putting their hands out wanting to come to this education? How do you promote it?
Yeah, so usually we work with the education program liaison person in the detention centre.
Right.
So they know when we're coming in, and they would put out pamphlets and ask young people who wants to attend, and then I mean, sometimes we might get two. Yeah. But that's two. Two. You know, two to us. Yeah. That's a win.
It is.
So that's how that one. I think I put in Brisbane Youth Service there because they are sort of the most age-appropriate program that's tailored for young people. So usually with other programs, it's 18 or over. Yeah. And then we usually have to sort of ask them, can there be an exception? So there is that sort of gap limitation for young people in receiving sort of intervention programs to try and sort of educate them in changing this sort of behaviour that we were sort of talking about. So that's why I put the Brisbane Youth Service there, and also the gap that we really do need in a culturally appropriate education program. Exactly. So hopefully someone out there in the community.
I'm just going to ask a quick question because it's relevant to what you've just spoken about. Someone's asked, is the pilot youth service available to both the aggrieved and respondents?
Yeah, at the moment, I think.
Unless there's conflict.
Yeah, so legal aid will deal with the aggrieved in the sense of if they're young people, but we will sort of see more the respondent. But if there is a conflict in regards to an aggrieved where legal aid can't see the aggrieved, then we would then be the ones to, and then maybe make a warm referral for the respondent to another legal centre.
Thank you.
And it's only available in Brisbane, I think, at the moment. I think everyone's like, yeah, you've got Brisbane there in brackets. Yeah. Future goals. So we're very ambitious at YAC.
We like people.
We are very ambitious at YAC. So our future goals within the next 18 months, we are wanting to sort of create board games to teach domestic violence, because from our experience going out to the detention centre, such a sensitive topic because some of these young people have been victims, and then perpetrators. So we found that maybe we're trying to develop different ways where we can provide education to young people by using board games. So at the moment in my brain, it's like snakes and ladders. So the board games is that players makes decisions in various domestic violence scenarios, learning about support services, legal rights and protection measures. And the game will include like realistic sort of challenges and consequences, fostering empathy and understanding. So that's kind of like the premise. But in my head,
There's a lot of work. There's a there was a program that's in her shoes, and it is interactive like that. So it's something that we'd be looking for if you develop something.
Yeah.
That in the community, it would be great. Yeah.
And I think one of the first time I went out to detention centre, and I think I had my sort of slide and I was like talking, no one was really listening.
No.
And then I knew I had to change my tactic. And of course TikTok. And I remember watching TikTok and seeing that they had red flag, green flag.
Oh, okay.
So on the spot, I just went, okay, we're just gonna play a game. And I was like, so has anyone heard of red flag, green flag? They're like, yeah. So then it was just giving them scenarios of relationships, kind of like X, I love X and Y. X did this to Y. Is that a red flag, green flag? Red flag, so the interaction to that, because then it doesn't make them feel like I'm talking to them about their experiences.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that was an example why the board games then came to mind to sort of develop to kind of better cater and close this gap of understanding.
Yeah.
At the moment, we also wanted to expand in our current resources. At the moment, it's a short animation focusing more though on the youth justice space. We're in the final stages and it should be developed and ready to go live. We're wanting to maybe expand that to DFB and animation and also TikTok. Yes, everybody, we have a TikTok page. So we have like legal sort of informative information there.
Right.
So we're hoping to sort of extend that to the DFB space as well. So that's pretty much it.
Amazing.
Wow.
I feel like
Thanks, Vi. That's
You
fantastic.
did really well.
And I didn't want to cut you off because these are such interesting insights I think will be so valuable for everyone listening. So time-wise, yes, we are pushing it, but I think if we did go over a little bit today, if you can't stay for the whole, if you have to leave after the 1 hour mark at 2 o'clock, just know all these extra important snippets will be in the recording. So please stay with us if you can, but so we might go over a little bit today, but if you do have to go, just know you'll be able to watch the full recording when it's released online. Great. So the next part of our presentation, I'll hand back over to Fiona to talk a little bit more about Hear Her Voice.
So this was just, again, sort of focusing on what are some of the reports that have come out and what are these recommendations and responses. And I think it's really important to know what the data is, what is happening in the community. And so this is Queensland. So previously the other data was Australian-wide, this is Queensland. And the part that I found quite sad was that children account for 32% of domestic violence homicides in Queensland. So it's really important that we can try and keep these children safe. Physical violence together with non-violence forms of abuse were present in 57.8% of domestic violence related homicides between 2006 and 2020. So it is important for us to be aware that that it is so much in our community and we need to be doing something to change the trajectory. So, raising the awareness and then having these programs at an early stage. So I'll go on to the next one. So this is where we have a poll around the Hear Her Voice, and I have another question after this.
Sure, so I'll launch the poll now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just bring this up on everyone's screen. So the question that you'll hopefully see on screen, the 2021 Women's Safety and Justice Task Force Hear Her Voice Report 1 provided recommendations for the Queensland Government to develop and implement programs for youth that focus on primary prevention of violence against women. True or false? So if you could kindly answer that one now. I'll give you a couple more seconds. Okay, I'll close that one now and share the results. So the vast majority of us attending are saying true, 95%.
Yay. So yes, you probably would have guessed because of all of the programs within the Youth Detention Centre that yes, that there were these recommendations specifically for young people because we want to see this change. We want to be able to assist people when their values are growing and have a possibility of some change. And so it's compulsory in schools, and there were all these recommendations about that implementation of primary prevention. So it's before any programs happened, it's some of this trauma-informed process. But then we look at, have they completed all of these recommendations? So there was recommendation 9 to recommendation 12. When they've looked at where they are at the status of them, the programs are in there. There's respectful relationships in education hubs. There's communications about these being rolled out in all programs. And they're really looking now to implement and strengthen the ones in the youth detention centre. So it's really looking at that focus at the youth detention centre and being able to support them before they go back out into community. And they're looking at some 8 officers are working with state schools around tailored respectful relationships as a education professional development. So it's really looking to see that this is something that's needed at that space when they're starting these new relationships. So it is important that not only in school, but at home and in our communities, we're having these conversations. So this was the part that when I wanted us to have a look at was in relation to the e-safety, I think, but this is also coming from the report that 3 in 10 people aged between 18 and 19 have experienced intimate partner violence, so that, you know, they're experiencing it at a very young age. And then what's sad is that 1 in 5 girls in Queensland, they've experienced abuse by an adult before they turn the age of 15. So this is, you know, it's a sad reality that we're hopefully going to try and change. And I mean, small changes, that's all we need to see. And again, as you were talking about, you know, First Nations communities, that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are 33 times more likely to be hospitalised by domestic violence. So it's really important to have cultures about respectful relationships and have healthy relationships. And again, which is really sad, this data, that domestic violence is the leading health risk factor and causing of disability and death to women from the age of 15 to 44. And that's even higher than cancer, car accidents and heart disease. So this is a preventable health problem. And I think we're all, as we said right at the beginning, we're all here to be responsible for some change. So this is probably an e-safety question. We'll see what people think about this poll.
Okay, so this is our final poll for the webinar. I'll just launch this for you now. So the question is, young people are protected from technology facilitated abuse and the influences of unrealistic and or violent pornography. True or false? If you could answer, I'll give you.
You got to say poker face.
Oh. 10 seconds or so. Okay, we're just still clicking responses. Give it a couple more seconds. And I'll close that off and share the results. And the vast majority, 96%, say false. So let's click through.
Yeah. So yes, sadly it is false. That, you know, even though you have these age, you know, you've got to be a certain age before you can get in technology, that's just not working.
Yeah.
So, and it's really sad, you know, that they're sort of saying you've got to be a certain age before you can see some of this pornography. That's similarly not working.
Yeah.
So it's really sad that, you know, that this technology can be great, but it can also have these this increasing information that their brains are just not wired to reflect and say that's not actually a healthy behaviour. So you having TikTok and healthy, you know, games and whatever, I think is great. I mean, we've got to be in this arena. You know, that's where they're going to go. That's how relationships are formed and how they experience them. So you've got to be there also to be saying, you know, and in a not a disrespectful way, not in a judgmental way, but just sort of having some of those comments. Yeah. So I think this is a good way forward. Yeah.
What are they focusing on? What's being reinforced?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even with who they're listening to,
Yeah.
rather than rejecting that, what is it they're drawn to hear?
Yeah.
What's the message that might be useful to steer them along, rather than telling them not to do that, which is not going to work anyway.
No. So that, you know, that was what we actually found out when we were looking into this. There's some algorithms by these people who have TikTok that send them down this path.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, we've got to now get ahead of those algorithms to be able to say, you might go down this path, but there's other ways to have a better, you know, respectful information.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much, Fiona. We're now going to hand over to Alex from Anglicare Southern Queensland to talk about the Living Without Violence program. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, and I'm aware of time, and it's almost played out perfectly, because something we're talking about before we started was in the program that I run. It's a gender co-facilitated program, so I'm really aware of how my co-facilitator and I actually interact, because the men are watching that dynamic and also wanting to almost skew it so that the female voice is more, and so all that modelling that goes on in those sessions. So we run the 18-week men's behaviour program. What I wanted to do today was let's come from an approach of what do we do and some of the things that work, and then also for the men, what's in it for them? Because so much discussion is around what does me as a facilitator or we in community advocates want the men to do, rather than how do we engage the men and actually get them thinking to want to actually engage in behaviour change. So with the 18-week program, we do one-on-one assessments at the beginning, 18 weeks of group work, and then assessments during and at the end. We have a female advocate that works with the victim survivors, and that's really valuable too, because that gives information about, is she safe? Is the man's behaviour improving or declining? Is he doing what he's doing that he says he's doing in the program, as well as what's happening with breaching?
Yeah.
We have the court support, and so trying to capture men at the beginning. So the program we're running was based in New Zealand, and it's a mixture of strategies, sharing insight, as well as clips of men who've been through the program, and more importantly, or just as importantly, females talking about their experience. And so for the first time for some of these men is hearing women talk and the impacts on them. And part of this accountability, responsibility, which is what we're focusing on, is getting men to think about what are they doing, why are they doing it, what's the impact, and getting away from that external locus of control of she's doing this, or if she did something different or something else happened, then I wouldn't do this. So yeah, so I want to share the one main question that we get men to ask themselves, that we ask them, some of those key philosophies of the program, and then also interesting couple of areas of what has surprised men when they've come in, because it's a therapeutic process rather than a punitive, and a lot of them come in thinking it's a punishment. So in this next slide, we have the poster up on the wall, and the question we ask is this taking me closer to or further away from respectful relationships? And you'll see there's a pathway there, and like you were saying before, we have a red and a green pathway, and we actually have cards we put out on the floor, and I used to have them out on the floor, but now I get them to do it every week so that they're kind of thinking through it, and the more they do it, the more they do it. And then on the next slide is another variation, which is this taking me closer to or further away from family well-being? So getting them to ask this question around this choice point and having more insight into when are they starting to build? Because once they start to get into really being triggered, the frontal lobe's shutting down and it's too late. So part of this is to getting an understanding of what's going on. One of the main points of this is that motivational interviewing process around guiding, steering them, having the men come to their solutions, come into that insight, because no one wants to be told what to do. And without going to a lot of the trauma-informed approach around what happens when a man is told what to do and we just get into a combative sort of situation, which is the last thing that works, is getting them to ask that question: what are they choosing? What's the trade-off? What's in it for them? And also that it's coming back to that personal responsibility, accountability, and that they have control in themselves, and to build that emotional regulation, also that awareness of others. So it's not just about where they're at, it's also if their partners and family members are in distress, that they're not going to be blown off centre. What do they need to do to keep themselves centered to support other people?
Can they see that she's in distress? Do you think sometimes that's the thing also, that that's been difficult for them to see that that's made her distressed?
Sometimes they can, or they can see that and just want her to change, or it's about their own needs, or they're so consumed in their own needs. Right. So it's so much of the program at the beginning is around men having their own insight about what's happening, and then bridging to, well, what happens when she has a need? The children have a need, and then instead of expecting her to do something, what can you do?
Oh, great.
So in the next slide, one of the ways we work with the men is with that cognitive behavioural therapy approach, and that restructuring. So rather than changing behaviour, get in what's their beliefs, and as already has been talked about, and particularly with some of the research around those stereotypical masculine man box beliefs. So often people are thinking about beliefs in terms of towards women or against women. It's often that, as well as towards relationships, and then their beliefs about themselves, particularly those limiting beliefs around good enough, smart enough, man enough, and how they get triggered. So we spend a lot of sessions thinking about thinking and what are the beliefs, and then for men to then think about how does that influence how they think? What's the self-talk that's going on? Why are they feeling then the way they're feeling as a result of what they're thinking? How do they change their thinking to change how they're feeling? And then how do they act? And the emphasis on they're responsible for what they're responsible for, rather than she or they or the system. So we continually run through this. We have cards on the floor, so they sometimes will walk through that, see what their choice points were retrospectively, and also then sometimes when they're going down the wrong pathway, how do they exit off that and have that humility and that maturity to notice where they're at. So the next slide shows a little bit of the client profile and age. There's a typo down there, should be the mean age is 33. So we find that 18 to 25 cohort is still significant. I've been doing some research for 6 years in community men's programs, and the average age I found there is 46. Right. So it's very interesting how there's a much younger age group that are coming through, and also what we're finding is the chaos in their life. And rather than having a punitive approach of if they're not attending, how do we work and engage with them? Because ultimately, what's going to keep the women and children safe? So, because if we kick them out of the program, if they're not attending because employment or housing or finances or transport, then they're just going to come back in a worse situation and create more chaos. So, working with them, they're more open to work on that, particularly that generational trauma and what's been going on, and get support in those other areas, in that more social work sort of aspect that's outside of the program. But even just coming in and a cup of tea or a coffee and a biscuit, and just to help them just diffuse from all the stress in life. In terms of the next slide, approximately half are mandated coming through on intervention orders, some reasonable direction or an order as part of probation parole. That 45% voluntary is a real trap, because it might seem that half the men are actually wanting to be there and engage, but a lot of it's it'll be good for you when you go to court, and a lot of adjournments that allow them just to do a program. So part of what we need to work with is how do we steer the men away from box ticking to actually seeing value, because I say to them, coming here for 18 weeks, just to tick a box.
Yeah.
What a waste of time.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's try and work on what could you think about and what might be a strategy. So
you're saying that it's useful that we're sort of saying, because we love these programs and the people that come out of them are often saying, like, I didn't know there was another way.
Yeah.
And I've now learnt there's other techniques, and I can, you know, earlier on I can recognise what I'm doing. Are you saying that we should be still promoting, or?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And the approach for these men is not because it's going to get them off. It's about, and this is a man that came into the program who just resisted the whole way along, and finally he just said, I'm not here because everything's going well in my life.
Yeah, yeah.
And I share that quote because part of that is when there's chaos, when there's things that are going on, the men recognizing themselves that they need support. So to steer them at that stage of engagement around, this is going to be valuable for your hearing, and it's also going to be valuable in life because there's only so long the can can be kicked down the road, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what the men also find valuable is when we do the assessment one-on-one sessions, for most of them, it's the first time they've ever talked about what's going on in their life, what's happened to get them to that point without being worried about what's going to happen to them. And it's a relief for a lot of them. For a lot of them, they start to make sense of it, and they've described it being like mush in their brain. So that's one of the big elements of this is they finally get relieved. They can see what's going on. Some of that trauma from when they're growing up, some of the conditioning, some of the beliefs that they might have about themselves and relationships, all the media, just there's so much going on in their mind. And as you would know from any challenges you've been trying to get through, doing it alone, the lone wolf we call it, it's really hard. So to gently suggest to these men to get some support, not necessarily to change because they don't like that language, just to get some insight, to get some strategies, to have life being a bit easier. I'm kind of trying to talk about it from a selling point of view to get them in the door, because once they get in the door, and part of the other research, I think that might be even the next slide. Oh no, I'll come to that in a minute. Around just being in an environment where they can talk, be with other men, having structure every week to catch up with themselves, and we do some mindfulness, we do other ways of them just being grounded and checking in with themselves. This next slide, I'm not going to go through it because that's a whole presentation in itself. We do lots of inventories around mental health, around substance use, around their problem solving, abusive practices. And we do that at the beginning, halfway through, and then at the end. And the Women's Advocate also does the abuse inventory to see what the men are disclosing to us and then what's happening at home. Now, this I wanted to do a poll question. So a man's self-report on his abusive behaviour at the beginning, is that going to go down or go up halfway through the program and then to the end? What would you expect?
I thought it would go up halfway.
Absolutely right. And it's actually a relief when that does, because at the beginning they're coming in blaming, not taking responsibility, so a lower level, and then halfway through we see an increase, so that they're becoming accountable, owning and being responsible for what's happening, and then that decrease. So in terms of some of the results, it's showing that significant decrease in the way they're communicating, way they're behaving, even some of the DASS, depression, anxiety, stress scales. So not with all men, so I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, but that in itself is really interesting. And then each week we get the men to map themselves. Where are they in family wellbeing progress? Are they moving up or are they moving back? And also to remind them that it's not about lip service, that like any behaviour change, sometimes they'll do well and sometimes life happens. And to then be able to work through what that is. This next slide, and I wanted to say to Catherine, tell me when time's up, because if that's okay, because that's also how I'm going to model and talk about in the program, because it's getting the men out of being in control. And so this is some of the results around psychological and physical abuse and the differences between what the men report and what the women report. So if you just eyeball it, I'm not going to go into detail, just some of those significant differences. So trying to get them to have insight, to reflect, having some of those clips where the women are talking about the impacts, the men talking retrospectively, and how that links to the research that there's still a big gap, unfortunately. Client feedback, that's kind of what we've already touched on, around being themselves. What does it mean to be authentic? What does it mean to be the man that's right for them and their family, not what society's saying or the latest social media person. Having other men to share their story with really surprises them, where they're able to open up and have that consistency and let their guard down. And the communication skills, that's really difficult because sometimes that's weaponized. So it's really this fine line between what communication skills that are going to enable them to decrease their abusive behaviour versus what are they going to be to then weaponize and say you are and blame the woman. The incident map, we map with the man what led up to the main incident. So what the benefit of this is, it gets the man out of thinking it's a one-off. What's everything that's led up in the days, weeks, months, years, particularly maybe what's happened in their childhood around beliefs around being a man, not allowed to be themselves, feeling not good enough and how they react. And then mapping what they were thinking and feeling. What are they saying to themselves? What were they doing? What was the other person's response? What's enabling it? So I could go into a case study, but I think that's enough for the moment, right? And maybe some questions. So,
thank you, Alex. We have gone a little bit over time, but I thought it was important that not to stop this conversation because there was just so many valuable insights that I thought people attending would find so helpful to hear and learn about. Because we, at this point in the presentation, we usually take questions. If we do get a couple come through, we'll get to those, but we will move towards closing off the webinar just because we've gone over. There haven't been any questions come through yet, so if you do have a question, shoot it through now. I'll just do what I would say is the wrap-up section at the end, and if I see any questions come through, we'll touch on those then. Oh, actually, there was this final statement. Fiona, did you want to talk to that slide?
Well, I think it's really important that we remember this, that we all have a responsibility to stop the behaviour and attitudes that trivialise, excuse or perpetrate domestic and family violence. And I think that's what we've all spoken about.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere that we have that responsibility.
Thank you. So as I said, if you have a question, send it through now and I'll just move on to the wrap up at the end of the webinar. So on the screen now is Legal Aid's contact phone numbers for clients needing legal help. The first one is our main 1300 number for legal information referrals. We do have a priority phone line for First Nations clients. That's the second number listed there. They'll be answered as a priority in our call queue, so please encourage the use of that number. And the last number is if there's a question about a legal aid application that's already been submitted. These are all on our website as well, of course. Our website is a fantastic resource for you all. There's heaps of free publications, resources. The publications, you can order them and they'll be delivered to you free of charge as well. They're totally free, so please get on there and get copies of whatever you need for your service. You can also print those out. There's heaps of great legal information on lots of common legal issues on the website as well. So please have a good look around on all the resources available there. So I look after Legal Aid's Community Legal Education Program and run the webinar program as well. We do run these webinars monthly. We'll send out a notification if you're interested to register for the next one. We also pop them on our website, so please keep an eye out for any future webinar dates coming through. And as I said, we upload all our webinar recordings to Legal Aid's YouTube channel. There's a particular playlist there that captures all these community legal education webinars, and I'll send the link to that to everyone who's registered for today's webinar. Follow us on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, X, to hear about what's coming up in our community education program. And while I've been talking, a couple of questions have come through, which I'll pose to the panel, and that is, what about special resources for people with cognitive impairments? Any special resources for people in that category?
I'll put it on the list of our
Future goals.
future goals.
Yes.
Yeah. I think there are some cards that you can have, and I know that Legal Aid has developed some cards, and I think it is similarly about those games, about having maybe some cards about how you're feeling. So the Blurred Borders is a really good program, and I think, you know, it is looking at maybe that's something that we could, you know, look at for the future, is about how do they feel, and have a card that's about it rather than them having to explain everything.
And interestingly, next month's webinar in June is a little intro to the Blurred Borders toolkit. So we'll be talking about what that is, who can use it, the types of clients and the areas of law that covers. I'll be presenting that with a couple of colleagues, so look out for that one. But since we have gone over time, we might wrap it up there. So I just want to thank our speakers again, Fiona, Vi and Alex. Thank you so much. It was such a useful conversation. Everyone, look out for the recording. It'll be available soon. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.